Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of Esports Boom, your weekly esports business podcast. I'm Maurice Eisenman. I'm joined by my co-host Anton Ferraro. And Anton, we're fresh off another esports conference, XLiveCon.
Oh man, it was great. You know, every esports consultant in the business is there. Every new vendor, everybody's trying to find out how this esports thing is going to help them. Honestly, I had a pretty good time. I think that these esports conferences are super valuable, more so for the networking that happens in between the panels as opposed to the panels. The panels, it's kind of like, people go on stage and they give you a sales pitch of how their business is going to help esports and what they can provide. And it's only when you break out into these like little one-on-one sessions that you can actually ask the deeper questions. For me personally, I love that I got to speak to some of the ES Force guys. It's very rare that they are in the US, and it was interesting to pick their brains. What their vision for esports is. I also enjoyed, I'm trying to think of who else, Matt, the NFL and the NBA were there, so we got a little bit of insight into, how they're going to approach their leagues. Mo, who did you enjoy that was out there?
Well, just from a panel perspective, what I liked and was really unique is there was a presentation on esports gambling. It was given by a woman. Sorry?
Her name was Brett?
Yeah. From I think she was from the University of Las Vegas. They have like a gambling research center, and it was really eye-opening for me, primarily because unlike a lot of other panels, she was being a little critical, which is really unique in the space, and it's needed. And other than that, the networking was great. There were, you think pretty much anyone in New York who does esports, because we're not Los Angeles, we're a little smaller. But then you find out so many people who work in the space and do really awesome stuff, and that's always great. And you make new acquaintances, and it was really, really awesome.
Yeah. So Mo, let's dive and get into the show. What interested you from the last week?
Well, this might not be the biggest story in the week. One of the things that really piqued my interest, and I think we can debate a lot about, is the Nielsen news. So, as you know, Nielsen announced their entrance into esports. So, people who don't know, Nielsen is basically, there's something called a Nielsen box, which is a box that is one box for every 30,000 people in the US, I think, or maybe a little less, and they will give you ratings. They will give the TV shows ratings, how many people watch the show. So they're really, really important in traditional TV, and they do a lot in traditional sports industry with regards to research on sponsorship, on ratings. So they're really important in traditional sports, and they just announced their entrance into esports. So, just some of the facts and that they will provide sponsorship valuation, fan insights, custom industry research, and consulting services. What was really interesting to me was that they have a really good board of advisors, people from ESL, ESPN, Facebook, FIFA, MLG, the NBA, and many, many more. And so that was a good set of people from traditional industry and esports industry. But Anton, besides what you're thinking about, I'm wondering, is this something that esports needs?
So I think that the barrier of entry to accurately tracking TV was much more difficult than tracking digital impressions. And I think that a lot of the valuable numbers that exist in esports aren't publicly available, and the companies that have them have no incentive to share them with Nielsen. So I'm dubious as to how effective Nielsen can be in this space, because if you look at somebody like Netflix, right, they put out all these shows, they spend, $8 billion a year on creating content. Why is Amazon or Facebook or YouTube going to give any data to Nielsen that will, potentially be valuable to their competitors? So, any data that they have, the only reason I can think of is advertising, but I don't know if even if that's a strong enough incentive.
Well, it's interesting because I think I have a slightly different opinion. I think Nielsen can be really valuable in theory. I think they clearly have the expertise to do research, and they have the funds, they have the organizational structure. Similar to when ESPN got into esports, in esports journalism with ESPN Esports. It has a lot of potential. And looking at ESPN, I actually think they did a great job. Jacob Wolf and for instance, broke a big news piece this week, which we're going to talk about later. But they keep on doing great stuff. And I think that it's the same with Nielsen. They have a lot of potential, but what is really important is that they, in their staff, their day-to-day staff, not just their advisory board, they hire people that understand the space. Because the way you approach a Twitch stream is a completely different way you approach a traditional broadcast.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting that in the last couple of weeks, I've seen a bunch of space in the streaming metrics tracking. I saw Stream Hatchet was bought by Millennial. Disclosure, I do a lot of work for Millennial. There was Esports Charts, and then there's also Gamma Loco. And I'm sure there's many more, but that space is definitely heating up. I wouldn't be surprised to see Nielsen make some acquisitions. I don't know how. I think it's possible for them to replicate a lot of the work. Whether or not it's cheaper for them to buy it is also interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that. And I love esports charts and Gamma Loco, so don't get me wrong, but I don't think that acquisition is that costly. And I think it can be relatively valuable for Nielsen. It can be a brain buy, as they call it. So Anton, what was the story that was really interesting to you this week?
So I think you kind of teed it up in the previous segment, but I think the New York finally getting some hint of which Overwatch team they're going to get.
We got our spot. We got our team, our hometown team, baby.
So I just a little overview. So recently, Sterling Capital made an investment into Rekt Esports. And Mo, correct me if I'm getting any of the facts wrong, or if you disagree with anything, please jump in. And we were under the impression that Rekt was going to help facilitate, the transaction for the New York team. Now comes out of left field that, New York is acquiring a Korean team, a very skilled team, but one of the members of the Rekt staff went out today on Twitter and was basically saying that, it's a huge risk. To be frank, I agree with him. I think that the risk of negative psychodynamics for the team, of bringing a squad of import players into a new region, has a 50% chance of success or failure. And if you're betting on the fact that, okay, I can bring in a group of players from one region and build a team from that. So let's say that 50-50 success, it fails or succeeds. If it fails, your pivot out of it is going to be incredibly hard, because you're going to have to rebuild that whole team from scratch. I don't know if I've ever seen a situation, or I can't think of one, where you've had a team that was primarily Eastern importing a single Western player. I've seen where Western players have imported Eastern players, but I have never seen it work the other way around.
Well, just to go on all of your points. So first of all, Jacob Wolf broke the story. That was the story I just alluded to.
Yes. And
incredibly done. Over the past, the guy has been on a run. He's been breaking stories, and a lot of times people laugh at him and are like, "Oh, this isn't like you say sources. Like, what are you talking about?" And then a week or two later, it gets broken.
Yeah, wasn't there a joke too that Blizzard blacklisted him for getting too many scoops?
Yeah. So I think that that this story is probably true based on his track record, and actually I'll get to that later. But it's interesting that the owner of LW Blue and Luminacy owner Steve Maida were the ones who brokered this deal. So that was in the article. Yep. So it is clear that it isn't Rekt that did any of this. And you already alluded to one of the members of Rekt who tweeted out, his displeasure with the situation. But one of the other things is that the star of the team of LW Blue, a player called Flower, who arguably, I don't watch a lot of Overwatch, but I asked around, and some of my friends that do watch it a lot say that he is, if not the best player, he's one of the top players in the world. and he actually cannot make it into the league because he's 17 by the time the league starts.
Okay.
So he might just have to sit out for a year. But he actually quote tweeted Jacob's Ball's tweet and wrote confirmed. So that was,
Was he the player that the other article referenced? There was another player that got cut from a team. Was that LW Blue or was that somebody else?
I don't think so. I don't think that. Yeah, that was LW Blue. I think that might have been Flower in the case. Yes.
So that if I had to speculate on anything, that's probably the Mets saying that he's a liability and LW Blue clearing their roster to prep for the acquisition.
Yes, that could definitely be, and it's. But just to make sure, this has been confirmed by a former player, or by a player of LW Blue, and it's basically true. I mean, I'm happy for New York City that we're getting a winning team. From a business perspective, I'm not sure if it was the good move, if it was the right move, because there are two things you need to think about when acquiring a team. One is this team going to win, which is really, really important, especially if there's a relegation system. And you know that if you don't play well one season, you can lose your investment.
Well, there's not going to be a relegation.
Exactly.
Okay.
So when it's a franchise system, you need to think about marketability, because you can have long-term investments into players, into teams. So you need to think, can I market these players? Now, the Overwatch League is going to be an international league, but there are region lock, and there's going to be a Seoul team, and the Seoul team is incredible. So arguably, the Seoul fans will flock to their Seoul team. So I would say, look for the top North American, European players. Why? They'll be more fluent in English. Has always been a big problem with Korean teams. And if you want to create superstars, if you want your Overwatch team to get out of just the Overwatch scene and get into mainstream esports and get fans from everywhere, you need to have marketable players. You need to use those players and have citywide events, and it's going to be a lot more difficult if there are these culture shifts.
All right, so humor me for a second. Suppose that everybody in Sterling and everybody in Luminosity and LW Blue are way smarter than us, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a great...
They are.
Okay. And it's a great decision to import this team in New York. Suppose this team full of Korean players in New York starts winning. All of New York gets behind this team because New York loves winners. We're just going to be super excited. And then suppose the Korean team, the Seoul team, starts doing bad. Do we also get all the Seoul fans? And is that like an awesome upside to Sterling, where it's like, not only do they have the fan base in New York, they have the fan base in Korea, which is also, 28 million people?
I mean, that's really interesting, but I think when you have an international fan base, right, so that's the Overwatch League, you want to become more than just New York's team.
That's fair.
So if you want to attract, middle of America teams that don't have an Overwatch spot in their city, you need to have players that they can relate to. The best way that they can relate to is if, you can have live streams, if you don't need an interpreter. Seoul team is really, really good. They are probably the only team that can give LW Blue a run for their money. So I doubt that scenario is going to happen. But I don't know what Sterling Capital's priorities were. If their priorities were to just get a winning team, congratulations, you just got a serious competitor for the league. So segueing into traditional sports teams or players investing into esports teams. So one of the biggest stories this week was that G2 Esports raised what they called their initial growth capital. So they had a round of investment, and there's some really, really interesting investors. They have Everblue Management, Macro Ventures, and Go For It, which are more of the traditional venture capital firms. Really interesting to see that 2 out of the 3 of those are American. There's one of them that is really focused on Hollywood investment, so entertainment. And then also, as a soccer fan, it was really surprising to me to see FC Barcelona midfielder Andre Gomez invest in the team. That is surprisingly interesting to me. They said G2 Esports in their press release that the capital will be used to enhance their talent's infrastructure and their content and brand initiatives. So what are your thoughts on this, Anton?
So I'll be blunt, I don't know much about those. What I do, whenever looking at an investment though, it's always good to look at the person behind it. Like basically, which person are you betting on? And Ocelote has been doing well for year after year after year. He first gained notoriety as a really good streamer. Then he went on the record with an article saying he makes over 400,000 euro a year, which I think in 2012 or whenever that came out was absolutely ridiculous. But and then I think his last big one was that I think he flipped a Counter-Strike team to FaZe from I think he bought it at 500 and maybe sold it at 2 million. I don't know if those numbers are right. I know that the upside for him was enormous for holding on to them for something like less than 6 months. So if he's going to meetings with any of these teams and they're like, okay, what is your track record? And he lists all these different things, I'm not surprised that he was able to acquire that money. I also think that, his persistence and his track record is going to allow him to succeed. I think this money will probably be used to pay some franchising fees because I think, didn't the EU LCS announce that they're switching to franchising as well?
I don't know.
I think that there was something about there was a reference to EU LCS switching it, but that might be what it could be used for. Major changes coming to EU LCS, revenue on the way. My article that I'm referencing is coming from Unicorn, and basically the byline is Riot has plans for a major shakeup of the EU LCS scene, including a new revenue sharing model and a move away from the group format. I know that when North America went to the franchise model, or when the franchising model was announced, a lot of the European teams were trying to jump ship. I think that Riot I wouldn't be surprised if Riot, to placate them, is also trying to provide some security to the European teams. And if some of this money may be used for growth, some of this money may be used for the buy-in.
Yeah, well, I think in general, from my conversations with some team owners and some investors in particular, most teams come to investors for two reasons when it comes to getting money. One is the obvious, which is getting franchise spots. That costs us a lot of money. And it's no surprise, it wouldn't be a surprise if in the future we'll get the same structure in the NLCS, in the EU LCS as well. Especially with over 100 applicants in for North America.
It's ridiculous.
So, you need to have some money. I'm not sure if this initial growth capital would cover that, but it can at least give them maybe enough money that they can make a bid. Secondly...
And EU could also go for less than North America.
Yeah, agreed. And secondly, they can. A lot of teams need money for content. Because a lot of good teams are understanding that in order to set their team apart from the rest, they need to become more than just the best in Counter-Strike or just the best in League of Legends. They need to create content that can attract new fans, or they can sell to buyers. And there are a lot of buyers in this space. Especially we see in esports teams that there are a lot of fans that are fans of players and not necessarily of a team as a whole. And a lot of teams think that the way they can attract a lot of fans to become fans of teams as opposed to just one or two players is to create real storyline behind the team and to create content that is compelling for fans and can attract them to one particular team. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of money that's being given to these team owners and to these teams is going to be used for content.
No, content is expensive, and I've seen from discussions with various organizations in the space, esports teams are going to major brands and requesting numbers in the 7 figures, sometimes in the 10 figures. What they're walking away with are 6-figure deals. So you have to spend money to make money, and this money is hopefully going to allow them to scale up into something where they can get the bids that they are asking for. And again, a nice little segue from content and sponsorship is, it's been a good week for sponsorship in the space. You had Mercedes-Benz that jumped in for ESL, and you had T-Mobile that jumped in for TSM and Cloud9. Mo, any thoughts on those?
I think it's amazing. T-Mobile has been doing some great stuff in the past. They did some stuff with FIFA pretty early on, a year or two ago, but they have really put gas behind the pedal for the past couple months. I was at E3, and they had a full-on stage and esports activation there with a FGC tournament. an Overwatch tournament as well.
They sponsor the US team.
Exactly, and they're the official sponsor of the USA Overwatch team. And from what I've been hearing from people involved in the space is that they're particularly excited about sponsoring teams. They've seen some really, really good results. So it's no surprise that they're sponsoring two of the biggest names in North American esports. With TSM and Cloud9 are arguably the two best orgs either in North America or around the world when it comes to branding. So yeah, this is incredible.
I'm also interested to see how the relationship exists there. So just for visibility, the TSM and Cloud9 deal for T-Mobile, I think, was teed up by WMEIMG.
Yes.
And WMEIMG also helps run the Bud Light's efforts in the space.
Yep.
What's interesting is that, about a year ago, you had an article saying that Twitch is also responsible for doing sales for TSM and Cloud9. And I'm curious to see how, how those two entities are competing in the space. And it's kind of interesting to see that, despite the, outlets that Twitch has at their disposal, WMEIMG is still able to deliver massive brands.
I don't think they're necessarily competing.
No?
No, because the E3 tournament was done with Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's more of a partnership. It's a little bit of a limb, but I don't think they're necessarily competing against each other. But the second sponsorship we saw, Mercedes-Benz, mm-hmm. is really, really interesting. And one of the few gems I heard at XLiveCon this week was with regards to the Mercedes-Benz sponsorship.
Is that Manny?
Yeah, I think it was Manny who said that. It was that the reason why they sponsored it, that was his kind of theory, but it made sense as well, was because this isn't to get like the esports fan base to just all of a sudden just buy Mercedes-Benzes. It particularly has to do with Dota, because they're sponsoring ESL One Hamburg, which has a big Dota 2 tournament, and it's because a really big market for Mercedes-Benz is Ukraine and Russia. Is people who have the capital to spend and buy Mercedes-Benzes, and they're big buyers of Mercedes-Benzes. And what do Ukrainians and Russians just happen to play a lot? Dota 2.
Yeah.
So it is more of a to increase their already existing user base of clients than to create a new one all of a sudden.
No, absolutely.
So one of the other things we mentioned in XLiveCon, that we were having a conversation with Slasher, and we were really, really surprised by this. So a company called Skills was named the fastest growing company in the US by Inc. magazine.
So, Skills. I'm not 100% sure on what they do. My understanding is that they help, they have a back-end software that injects into mobile games, or they have a platform of mobile games. And when you play a mobile game, you can wager a certain amount of money that you will win your game against a real opponent. Skills takes a cut of that. Over the past 3 years, revenues have increased 50,000%. I'm not sure who's auditing them, but until innocent until proven guilty, so I'll believe them. They apparently generated $54 million in 2016. Is that the number?
It was.
I'll check that, but go ahead.
But in the meanwhile, it's really incredible. It's one of those companies that hardcore esports fans don't know about, because
is it esports now?
Well, they're calling actually, if you go to their website, they're calling themselves like esports for everyone.
Okay.
But what is particularly interesting is that they're focused on casual games. You don't use skill software to wager on a Hearthstone game or your phone or Vainglory game. You're using it to wager on your mahjong game, or like your billiards game that for some reason has 1 million users, and like there are like middle-aged ladies on the train playing games.
I mean, Skills did with that one panel. Like, okay, there was a panel on how to get women involved into esports, and Skills, like, applause to them because they got that market in there. It's I think the one takeaway that everybody on the panel said was that women spent more money.
Yeah, and this is a great example that the most esports title that they have, that's like the most esports, is that they're working together with Capcom on their Street Fighter mobile games that uses the Skills platform. It's interesting. I think the Skills platform, I think Skills has a growth potential with more upcoming hardcore esports titles, let's say Critical Ops or something like that. So, a title that is growing rapidly but doesn't necessarily have the grandeur of a Hearthstone or a Vainglory yet.
Wait, I'm sorry, what is that game?
Critical Ops.
Is that a Skills game?
It is. No, it isn't, but I'm saying it has potential to work with these type of games. It's Critical Ops is like Counter-Strike on your phone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just not really familiar with that title, so I can't speak to that at all.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's which is exactly my point. These are the type of games that Skills is working with. They're the type of games that we don't necessarily play, but have a large audience that fall outside of our demographic.
Is the world already passing us by?
Maybe.
Has esports migrated to mobile?
Well, I can't wait. If Skills start going into Candy Crush, they'll become billionaires.
No, and I mean that's the thing. The revenue numbers that we're seeing from them that are reported in this article are $54.2 million. And that's from 2016. We don't even know how much more they scaled up in 2017. So it's, I mean, yeah, it's dubious whether or not it's esports. I think it's skill. Like if I had to define it, it's skill-based gaming. I guess that's esports.
Skills-based gaming.
Yeah, that's, it's gaming. I don't think it's too far of a stretch to call it esports. Just because it's not Counter-Strike, Dota, or League of Legends. Let somebody else sit in there. I don't know. So the other one, if we're gonna start apologizing to people in episode 2, is our good friends at Sliver TV. So just a refresher, last week we did a jump back in time to August 2016, and we looked at companies that raised money in 2016, and we answered the question, where are they now? One of the companies we mentioned last week was Sliver TV, and then we hadn't really heard much of them in the past year. So it came out earlier this week that Sliver TV raised a $9.8 million Series A round with investors that included Sierra Ventures, the VR Fund, Samsung Next Fund, and Sony Innovation Fund to build out their VR offering.
Yeah.
Mo, what are your thoughts?
I'm not apologizing. I'm sorry. I'm not apologizing because I don't see this investment being worth it. I'm very bearish on VR, and I really don't think it is worth $9.4 million. I have used some of Sliver's programming, and it is very compelling, and it is very good, and it can help definitely elevate the esports experience. The question is if VR is the right platform for that. There are two main reasons. First of all, it's a huge barrier of entry for consumers still. And if you use the Samsung VR headset, it's not going to be compelling content. It's not the quality. You need to have, a $500, $600, $700 headset. You need to have a computer that can play it. Just a lot of people can't do it. And then secondly, for a lot of people, esports is a second screen experience. They are watching esports while at the same time being on their phone or socializing with friends or being on a Twitch chat. And until VR gets to the point where you can do all those things while watching an esports tournament, I don't think the market is going to accept it. How about you, Anton?
So I had some interesting conversations about VR with people in the past week, and here is the angle that somebody experimented with. So telco providers are rolling out 5G data plans. They hope to ask for users for their install base for more money to get access to those plays. One of the avenues and one of the offerings that 5G allows telephones to access is live streaming VR. Because right now the telephone plans that are available, it's too hard to get live streams of VR. It's just too much data. But when you're trying to convince people to buy that 5G plan, one of the carrots that you can provide to them is VR, that your phone can support VR streaming. And Sliver, if they succeed, if they pivot to cell phones where there's a larger install base, they could become potentially a very lucrative property for a telco provider that's rolling out a 5G plan.
They can. It's a lot of ifs.
It's a lot of ifs, but it's a path to success that exists.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That's very much true. And one of the things that I'm more excited about, although it might not be a huge success, is what the NFL announced this week. So once again, we'll think back to XLiveCon, but there was a panel where you had an executive from the NFL, an executive from EA, really talk in depth about their Madden Club Championship.
Yep.
So just to set the facts straight.
Disclosure, I'm working on several Madden events.
2 disclosures in one episode. Look at you making moves. It's really interesting because there are all the 32 clubs are involved. So basically what happens is you pick a team, you sign up, whether you're as the Jets or the Giants or whatever, and you try to, you play games, you use Madden Ultimate Team, which is, if people are familiar with FIFA Ultimate Team, it's kind of their variation of it. And you play games and you try to get on top of the leaderboard, on top of the ranking. If you get, in one of the top rankings of your team, you can then get flown over, or you have the opportunity to play at a local tournament. Once you do that, once you win that local tournament, you can represent your team at a final, which I believe will be played during the Pro Bowl. And there's a prize pool of $403,000. So what's really interesting to me is that, unlike FIFA and unlike NBA 2K, they're really focused on what I would like to call competitive gaming, as opposed to hardcore esports. So you don't have traditional teams signing a player with a contract for a couple of years. You really have the everyday person being able to just play the game and just stay in their couch and sit on their couch and play a lot, and hopefully make it out to one of these local tournaments. And for a game like Madden that isn't as international, the game of football does not have the same user base. I don't think Madden has the same install base that FIFA or NBA 2K has. Especially if you consider that it's just North America, it's not the rest of the world. I think it's a very good approach to their esports strategy. What do you think, Anton?
I applaud them for trying something new. It's interesting that they're pivoting back to the word competitive gaming, because for those of you that have been in space for 10 years, MLG was strongly against using the word esports. They were more inclined to push it as competitive gaming. Unfortunately, they lost. They did not succeed in that battle and have pivoted to esports. I think Madden has made a lot of great moves to integrate within the larger esports movement in the past few years. They've been operating the Madden Challenge for maybe since the 90s, I think, and it's always kind of been this one standalone tournament that occurred, and then you never heard anything about it. And now it's kind of they're creating, Matt Marcoux and his team are out there creating challenger events, premium events, ESL's involved. They're trying to go down these avenues of the Madden Club Championships. They're trying to incorporate teams and reach out to local audiences. Madden right now seems to be going wide. They're figuring out which one of these wide strategies is going to succeed, and then whichever one works, they're going to go deep in. And they're not necessarily taking people at their word of, this is the way you succeed. And I think that's valuable for them, because it's what works for League of Legends is not going to work for Madden. League of Legends is, a game as a service. Madden is a game as a product, where, every year, you have a sales cycle, you're trying to drive sales. Their esports, if that's the way that they plan to generate money, then their esports marketing strategy needs to be different.
Well, it's interesting you're saying that, because Madden is kind of pivoting to being a combination of both. because the way this
I
game
mean,
is
everybody's pivoting.
yeah, but the way this game is played is with Madden Ultimate Team, which basically is you have to do certain things. You can get Madden coins, and you can then use those coins to get packs of players, and hopefully the best players are obviously rare. And it's the same thing with FIFA Ultimate Team, where the real pros or a lot of fans end up paying to just buy more packs, and so they can get the players that they want. So I do think there's especially from EA, they're pushing this as a way to kind of release the Madden Ultimate product to more of a mass audience. So they for them it's definitely important to get in as big as user base as possible.
Yeah. No, and I think EA also made a move recently last week where they announced the competitive mode for Battlefield, which is one of their big verticals. John Nielsen, who was the commissioner at MLG for 8 years, is actually now at EA helping them with their Battlefield efforts. So, lots of faith there. I mean, John was excellent. And then Gamescom, I think, we saw the first competitive tournament for PUBG at Gamescom, and the numbers on Twitch were unreal.
I mean, PUBG it's everyone's consensus is this. PUBG has huge potential for esports based on viewership. Now let's try to find a way that we can actually make this into a competitive esports game, because you need to have 100 people to play a PUBG game.
Did you see their stage, by the way?
I didn't.
Dude, it was weird. It was like a cubicle farm, but instead it was like rocks, and so they had each of the 2v2s in like a weird cubicle area. I don't know, some people gave ESL flack for it. I liked it,
It's interesting. I wonder if PUBG, is going to try to change it a little bit to make it more competitive, specifically for esports. They might work with the tournament organizers like ESL to make some small changes specifically for competitive play. But yeah, PUBG's viewership on Twitch is unbelievable. I think they've been consistently either the 6th most used program on Twitch.
According to Gamo Loco, they're beating out League of Legends every day.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous, and it's quite interesting. It's very simple. It's just fun to play, and it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, it's the Hunger Games, man.
Yeah, exactly. So just as a last story, there's one thing that caught my eye this morning that I really would like to talk about, that is not necessarily esports specific, but is really interesting gaming activation. So Call of Duty and Comcast Xfinity worked together so that the way that you can get free access to the new Call of Duty World War II beta if you're a Comcast Xfinity member. So you don't need to have a pre-order, you don't need to pay for access to the beta, but you get free access. And while this is not a really big story per se, it is really fascinating to see a traditional company work together with a game publisher and do this type of kind of game sponsorship in such a unique way.
No, I mean, I think Xfinity has been in the space for a little while. I think they're sponsor of Evil Geniuses, if I'm correct. I think there may be several other teams. They have the Xfinity House. I think telcos have been making a lot of moves in esports. They see that we are probably the highest consumers of their products. We're the guys who are the most outspoken when our internet sucks, and experimenting in that area and trying to figure out what partnerships can be beneficial to both parties. It's kind of a no-brainer. I'm almost upset it took them that long to get here. What are your insights?
I think it's really smart. If you're looking at Xfinity, it's very easy for telco providers. It's their biggest customer. So if you're looking, I'm reading a fascinating book on Korean esports right now, and we'll make sure to put the link of that in the description. And one of the reasons they said that Korean esports blew up so much is because telecom providers like SK Telecom found out that their biggest user base was loving video games. So what is a better way to get more people to use your service as opposed to your competitor by sponsoring the teams or the things that they like to do? So if you're able to say, hey, use Comcast as opposed to our competitor, because now you can get access to all Activision Blizzard titles like World of Warcraft, or you get certain things in World of Warcraft with Blizzard. You can get in Activision, you get Call of Duty the game, you get to use the beta when it comes first out. You get all of these exclusive things if you use us as opposed to our competitor. That's how much we love gaming. I mean, that's the way you're going to get, especially Call of Duty tends to have skewed to a younger fan base. That's the way you're going to get them for life.
I mean, 100%. I have another story that I want to echo. You sent the SKT story. Really successful entrepreneur in the esports space sells his internet company and gets a pile of cash. And as a result of operating said internet company, he gets a really good view at what people are using their broadband internet for. One of them was porn, and the other one was gaming. And so as he's deciding which space he wants to operate in, he uses this data to decide that, well, I don't want to go into porn, so I'm going to go into gaming. So it's, again, a lot of people saw those numbers, and again, when I said, I'm surprised it took Xfinity that long to get there, I mean, that was 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem, and that was a culture shock for me when I came to the US, when it comes to telco providers and cable providers in general, is unlike anywhere else in the world, there's free competition. There are 5, 6, 7 telco providers, and you can pick one, and they'll bring a box to your house, and they use it. In the US, unfortunately,
there's monopolies all over.
There's monopolies all over the place. In my apartment, I can only use Time Warner.
Oh my God, that's awful.
Yes, and it's really bad, and therefore you're overpaying, and it's kind of this luxury situation for a lot of these telco providers, because they know, there's nowhere else for them to go. But I think they're also seeing that, first of all, there are overlap areas, so they're obviously fighting for clients, but they're also seeing that it's with net neutrality being pushed. There's a time where that monopoly is going to be broken, and they need to have a fan base, basically.
I mean, 100%. I mean, I have friends in Las Vegas, and I think the only provider out there is Cox. And they moved there, they bought the most expensive internet, and then now they're getting letters saying, we're capping your internet at 1 terabyte of downloads or something, and then after that, for every 200 gigabytes you use, we're charging you an extra $10. Come on. This is the year 2017.
It's really ridiculous. So one of the things that we would try to do is, just highlight an article that we read, like a news item, or a journalistic piece that was really interesting to us, and that maybe we don't want to full on discuss in the show, but it'll be good for people to actually look at in the description and click on. So Anton, what's yours this week?
So this one is really interesting. Twitch acquired video indexing platform Clipmine to power new discovery features. So Twitch acquired a clipping service. What's interesting is that this happened in November and wasn't reported until August. So they were very sneaky about it. What I will tell you is that I looked at Clipmine's info when I was working at Azubu. There's a lot of competitors in the space. You had Oddshot, you had Forge, you had Plays TV. Clipmine by far had the best stack out there. What made them unique is that they have something called optical character recognition. Basically, it's they're not dependent on APIs to pull data. They can detect text on the screen and import that into data. So, it basically frees Twitch to pull as much data as they want from games without the publishers who operate those games gating that information by API freedom. It's on TechCrunch, check it out. The guy who's the founder of the company, he was a past Googler, really smart guy. I think it's going unseen by a lot of people. It's, this takes you about 18 months to integrate it. I would not be surprised to see some of the tech that they got from Clipmine to be revealed at TwitchCon.
Great. So my article is more of a journalistic piece, which I think we're lacking a lot in esports, a more in-depth story that takes time to write and to do research about. And one of my favorite writers over the past couple months is someone from ESPN Esports. His name is Youngjae Jeon, probably a Korean writer. I'm probably butchering his name, but he goes on Twitter at Rally Jaffa, and he's an incredible writer, and he writes about some of the interesting stories in Korean esports. So really, things that we don't really hear about. And with regards to LW Blue, there was a really big controversy that we alluded to before, and I don't want to. And it has to do with one of their players getting released, and I don't want to go too in depth to it because I don't want to spoil anything. And it's really a long piece, and it will take you some time to write.
I read it. It was excellent.
Yeah, and I just want to end on an exploratory note. And definitely check that out.
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a great piece of, for how big these players are, for how big of a superstars these players are perceived, how much at the mercy of their management they are. And, it kind of tells you the other side of esports that you frequently don't see.
Yeah, and it's a type of stories the industry doesn't want you to know, but that only makes it even more important for us to actually read about it and spread the word.
So Mo, where can people find you?
Well, people can find me at Moishi Eisman, MOISHIEISENMANN on Twitter. I will probably change my username in the next couple of weeks. I'm just thinking about something that'll be worthwhile. So if you think about something fun, tweet it at me.
Great, and you guys can find me on Twitter as well. Joker can't spell with no E because I can't spell. And thank you guys so much for tuning in.